A question I would have for both of you, I'll ask you initially, Sliggy, goes like this. Before I can set up the topic of map pool and stuff, what I need to know is this. How would you contrast it, like in your particular case, to CSGO? Because obviously in CSGO, it's more like, I would say in general, it is actually about how well you know the map as to how you set your map pool up. In fact, you even get very crazy examples. I'll give you an example. You might, I don't know if you remember this. In 2018, when Na'Vi with the Simple and Zeus and Edward lineup, they used to win like almost every time on Train, but they never picked Train because their logic would be like, we don't understand the T side as well, or we don't feel comfortable in that tough scenarios. So even though I would pick it if I was vetoing for them, their logic would be, and at the time it would be like, well, let's go into Inferno, which you might have a worse win rate on because Inferno was the map Zeus, a very legendary caller, just called his whole career on like that. That just is his office essentially. So I want to know is this, is in Valorant, is it more like that? It's like, I understand this map, or is it like, if I have, for example, like very skilled players, I can play maps that I don't necessarily am as good at? What's the sort of difference, do you think?
It's actually just a mix of them both. Like if I was going to give a straight comparison, like again, it depends like map to map. Like a Haven, if I compare it to like Inferno, it's a lot similar in terms of like a main control. And Haven is the same as like Banana control. Everyone's like fighting. That's like the one point at the beginning you kind of have to fight for. It's like really important to like fight for. So you'll see like a lot of contention there. But then you have like these other maps because everything's smaller. Because all of these maps are really small, so like sometimes you want like aim duel maps, like your Ascent, your Breeze, like these kind of aim duel maps. That's where you can kind of rely on just pure aim, and you're like, well, that's how we looked at it with Breeze. It's like, well, we got two good AWPers and it's Breeze, and we have like Scream, who can just one tap an AWPer most of the time anyway. Like that's an incredible map for us. So it's like. It's a bit mix and match in terms of that. I think some of them have similarities, like Haven stuff has like similarities like CS stuff, even though it is like 3 sites that you plant. But yeah, and then there's other maps that are just pure aim maps, and maybe you don't have to have as good understanding, and you can just go, right, you guys just run around. That's at least how I viewed it in my team.
Right.
I'd never had to put much effort into Breeze, like if I'm honest, just because it's such an easy map to understand and you can just out-aim everyone. Whereas these other maps that are kind of close quarters, maybe it's more about trading, maybe it's more about utility. I felt like we had to spend time zone, or even just rotations like Bind. We're always historically bad at Bind just because there's like a teleporter there, and that kind of seemed to mess with everyone's heads. So yeah.
Do you have a sense for what it is, Gio? Like, are the maps that are more like, it's just if you have the aimers, and then the other maps are maybe if you're like the brain team or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I basically agree with what Sliggy is saying. Like, I think the really divisive map that really exemplified this was Breeze, because Breeze was a map that, because the spaces in Breeze are a lot bigger, it is more aim duel intensive, and so a lot of teams would avoid it if they felt like they did not have. Like, if they were more of like a utility-focused team and they didn't necessarily know specifically how to set up that map, because it was very easy to get it wrong. I think people definitely look at maps that kind of way. And you've also got things like, there are maps where you might need to be a little bit more spread thin. And some teams don't like that as much. Sure. But yeah, and then the rotate ones like Bind. It's kind of an interesting one, because if I compare it to the way that just because you brought up comparing it to CS, like if I compare it to the way that maps in Rainbow Six are kind of looked at, is Rainbow Six would have here are like scrappy maps, here are like the really cerebral maps, but then in the middle there were a couple of maps that were sort of known as like neutral maps. It was like, they are like the great deciders, like they are maps that actually in best of ones a lot of teams would go to because they were considered exceptionally neutral. So maps like Oregon was kind of this probably won't mean anything to you, but like maybe that one person watching will. Like Oregon was for a really long time the map that all of the best of ones were done on, which got incredibly boring in the broadcasts because it was just such a neutral map. There wasn't a huge swing between like whether it was attacker or defender sided, and everyone knew how to play it. It's like they were considered, we would call them checkbox maps, where it's like, to play them correctly, there are a list of things you got to do. Right. If you do them right, then you'll win the round. And so it was like, you just have to follow this step by step, essentially, and it's whoever does that step by step better. And then over time, you would see people adapting on what that step by step was. But then you would have these other ones more towards the periphery. Like there's a map map called Coastline, which is just like, yeah, if you're going against a team that has really good aimers and great gunfights, and you're not as confident there, you're probably not going to do as well there, you know. So it was kind of like that sort of thing. Then there was a map called Theme Park, which was a lot more yeah, I suppose like strategy intensive, right? So I feel like the swing in Rainbow Six felt a lot more extreme than it does in Valorant.
Okay.
Which, yeah, is kind of an interesting one. I think is like, you do have those differences, like in terms of the geometry of the maps in Valorant and the little gimmicks that come. I mean, Bind is obviously a clear one because it has the teleporters. It's the only map that has that. And so you often see like a team will have like their one permaban or whatever, but they're mostly okay on other maps. Whereas in like Rainbow Six, you could have a team who in a 7-map pool, like 4 of the maps they don't play. So,
that's mental.
Yeah, those teams would definitely suffer on LAN events. Like, trust me.
All right, I see what you mean. Right.
But because the regular season in Rainbow Six was always best of ones, they could do really well.
You can
just
go to the middle of the map pool. Yeah, makes sense.
Exactly. And then you would see the differences once you got to actual majors or whatever.
That's actually the area, again, casuals always misunderstand this. It's not, believe it or not, the worst part of best of one isn't that it's only one game, because in theory, the better team will still win. It's still Counter-Strike, it's not they don't try. The problem with best of ones is when you have the veto system, you've got the same veto system in Valorant. It's like you're never going to go to the weak map. So if I'm amazing on 6 out of 7 and you're amazing on 4, it looks like we're equally as good, doesn't it? Because we just both meet on one of your 4, basically. So we ban 3 and then that one's left over. So it just means you're going to get more upsets naturally because you're making more even games. So you're not really showing who's more versatile and who has the biggest spread.
They actually used to have a system in Rainbow Six, which they got rid of. And I think there was some talk about bringing it back, which I actually think would probably be a good thing, which is when you met in a best of one, the first bans were automatic, and it was whatever you played as your last map. So in your last official game, you would not be allowed to play. Like, let's say you played Clubhouse on your last game, that would automatically be the first ban. And if your opponent played, I don't know, fucking Bank on their last game, that would be automatically banned.
Just to force some more maps to be played.
So it guaranteed that you could not play the previous game. Right. And then when the whole format changed, it went from ESL to FACEIT at the beginning of 2020, they got rid of that. And that's how we ended up with like these, you know, you could do like 3 broadcast days and do 5 games a day. And like 12 of those 15 games would all be on the same map, you know?
Right. Yes.
Like you could end up with that. And then, yeah, you would have exactly the situation that you just spoke about, where it's like, yeah, you can always land in that neutral ground. So you don't really have to face the fact that there are these maps that you feel a lot less comfortable on. But then once you qualify for like the, you know, whether it's the Pro League finals, the majors, whatever it is, like that's where suddenly, and people would be like, oh, you know, why does this team suddenly look not that great? Because they're like really good in the regular season. It's like, well, because they can play like 3 maps, you know, and they're playing best of 3s.
Now you see, if you're a naive fan, why Thorin hates upsets. I don't hate underdog teams. They're brilliant. I like it when they win games. The problem is this. When an underdog team wins that BO1 on the middle map and they go into the playoffs instead of one of the best teams in the world, that's just an empty fucking spot, isn't it? Because the map that they were avoided in the map in the best of one, the strong team just picks into them, destroys them on completely. And like you're saying, the fan just thinks, because he's not following this part of the game, it's like, oh, the Cinderella run just ended, you know, oh, the magic went away. It's like, it didn't, mate. That would have happened in the group stage if you could pick like that. So the question here, Sliggy, I want to come back from the coaching perspective here, is actually, I think this is an underdeveloped area of CSGO. One of the reasons I do rave about people, Carrigan's the best example probably, is because if you notice, Carrigan understands basically that not only is the veto about getting a good map for me, it is psychological war. Like you can hit, one thing he always does is try, if possible, he's even doing it now in FaZe, is I even want that fucking 7th map. And there's the thing, I'm not being greedy when I do that, because if I get that 7th map, there's 2 scenarios happen. One, because I've got a better team anyway. If I play a bad team and that is their worst map, you can't assume I'm banning it, mate. I might just take it into you, fuck you up on it. it. And then secondly, because I've got more maps in my pool anyway, it basically means I can do things. I always thought this was genius from him, is think about all the other IGLs where, if you know the way a CS tournament works, right? You finish your game on the Thursday, you're going to play on Friday at 2 p.m, so you get to work quickly, right? Oh, we've only got so much time, right? We're going to do these 2 maps, start watching demos. Imagine you do all that, right? And you do it for Carrigan's best map, and then you turn up the next day at 2 p.m, and he just vetoes in like his 4th best map. You go, what the fuck? I just spent late at my night, I didn't even get any sleep. Like, that the game hasn't even begun, and you've basically already made their coach mild off the face of the earth. So the question I had was this, right? Obviously, if you leave it to pros, unfortunately, they're just going to go pick our best match, quote, just give us that and we'll carry, because they always believe they'll win the game, right? But I want to know what you thought of that, because I do think this is an area where if you can have that versatility, from the coach side alone, you could do so much, right?
Yeah, I think so as well. And like that was somewhere where I felt like we were like mixed, right? We were always bad at one map, which we would ban. And then we would have like one map that we weren't that good at sometimes, which kind of came like that owned us a little bit. But like in a best of 5 scenario, we were incredible. Like I felt like like with us, if we got into a best of 5 scenario, I felt like we were going to win. I'm not sure if we actually ever lost a best of 5, but I think we won every best of 5 that we played. Maybe that's wrong. I'm not sure. So yeah.
Does that imply the other teams like more heavily focused to the more limited pool?
Yeah. I think so for sure. I think like we had a good understanding of like all the maps, and the thing that kind of wrecked us a little bit is we were always not that good on 2 maps. So if people just picked this one map, like obviously ban and then pick, if people pick that one map, we would like always be a map down. I actually think that's maybe where I should have maybe put at the beginning of this team, I used to just pick like whatever I thought we were like gonna win, and then I would say like going later on, I would listen to the team more in terms of like what they would want to pick. I think maybe I shouldn't have done that sometimes, and I could have like but the thing is, I just want them with this team. I wanted them to feel like confident, and always feel confident. So it's hard to like not fall into that trap. But it's definitely like sometimes where I look to the matchups and I'm like, if we had picked this map, like I think it would be a lot better. But then also going back to that, like I felt like again going to champions, I felt like we were going to be fine against Send on Bind, but like sometimes it doesn't translate. I felt like that was a big problem with this team as well. I felt like me and my analysts, I feel like we're one of the best at like anti-stratting teams, and maybe sometimes that didn't like correlate into like, because we don't have an IGL, it's kind of hard to like big out the bigger picture. Yes. So that's like where I would love to work with an IGL. I feel like us and FPX are probably the best team at doing that. So yeah, that's sometimes where, and like that kind of came into my mind of like the whole team as well, as like that's where I started like doubting myself of like giving the players more power to kind of pick the maps, because I'm like, I kind of like think back to that Ascend game and I'm like, it just shouldn't have been played like this. Like, so I have to kind of go with their confidence. Like, so sometimes we had most perfect reads, like within 15 seconds we would know where they're ending. Like ends, but for some reason that wouldn't like correlate into the actual game. And like that was like for me, like when we've done like the sickest anti-strat, I'm looking at it and I'm like, there's no way we can lose this game, and then like we'll lose this game. That's when I started like doubting everything. But yeah, the map pools like it's such a big thing. And I actually watching the 100 Thieves video the other day when it was like Sean was talking about how they're just going to get really, like I liked his approach to it. He said they're just going to have 2 maps, because like obviously they're a new team, so they're just going to have 2 maps. If they ban that other map, we just pick them up, and then we have like one like perma pick that we're always good at, and then we're just like battle and we get like relatively good at these other maps. So I definitely liked his approach of it. And like we were saying with the Carrigan thing, like having the time to do that and having it just means that you're just so incredible. And then when it gets to the later stages of like tournaments, like when it gets to like the best of 5s and stuff like that, they just feel invincible.
You also, Gio, touched on a very relevant point to this as to why it's very dangerous to have a permaban, because you have to understand when they do it, because in CS you used to travel every week, they really never practiced the permaban. It wasn't like they did it sometimes, they just didn't do it in pro play. They would just never play it. So famously, like Alexi B, for example, had just never played the map Vertigo ever in an official game for something mental like 2.5 years or something. So then when he came to a different team and they had to play it, it's like, I mean, good luck, you're just starting today, mate, which is mental. Because here's the problem with doing that, is if the next map released is even worse for you, You've got Sophie's choice, haven't you? Pick your poison now, mate. Because as you're saying, the enemies are just going to wreck you if you don't play either. So you're going to have to pick one of them, and you're going to have to start being bad on it. And then the whole thing that you were saying, Sliggy, about when the players don't always get it. Here's the problem. Because a player naturally has to be confident. He has to think he's going to win the game, and we're better than them, etc. A player absolutely will just handshake a map. He'll be like, oh, we're like 75% win rate. They're like, yeah, good, then we'll win. But the problem is, if you're the coach, you're like, bros, let's just take this one with 55% win rate on, but they're appalling on. Like, you know, like, we don't have to be our best. We'll just beat them because they're bad at it. But, like, it's hard to get pros to opt in on that one, you know. They're just thinking too bad of the downside, I think, of like, oh, I'm going to look silly, I don't know. It's like, mate, that's how you win. Essentially, you get free games when you do that. That's how you just sort of cheese your way through brackets, innit?
Yeah, literally, essentially that. I think that's one thing that I kind of just should have done more, because there were loads of maps, like I said, like in a best of 5, I felt like we were so confident. There's so many times where like I should have just gone with like my gut more. And again,
Right.
like just like I'm new to coaching, like for sure. I'm new to coaching. I did like a half a year in CS, like with like easy skins and stuff like that. So I'm very new to it. I'm still learning. So this is like a side where I just have to be like. And like so that's what was great about all of this is just like I'm like learning, and like even like the Sean thing from that video was just like, yeah, that's like so smart. Like I should have like kind of like taken that on board. So yeah, it's still just a learning process for me. So I'm just kind of just honing the skills, and I think that's good. That like I like being in. I like having a job where I'm learning. That's why I try and switch up what I'm doing like every 5 years, just because I don't like getting too comfortable and being like that. So I like to kind of just do that side of it and just constantly be learning. So it's nice to kind of just learn on the job and do that stuff. But
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.